Sup, you've reached Clarissa. I'm out somewhere being da bomb and can't answer. My bad. Leave me your name, number, and a sweet message, and I'll hit you up later. Peace.
Hey, it's Amelia.
And Sherrick.
You told us to call and let you know what we're doing.
Weird we get your voicemail almost every week at this point.
Oh well, I guess we'll leave you a message about what we're up to and our pop culture thoughts of the week, and hopefully we'll hear back from you soon.
It's almost like we have a podcast about things where we talk about stuff that is serious sometimes.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel appropriate to...
Episode.
Yeah, a very special episode.
That's the main joke I'm going to make today is on a very special episode of...
Amelia and Sherrick, what are you doing?
Yeah. Being serious.
I'm actually going to rename the podcast just for this one episode. Where it's Amelia and Sherrick go, what the fuck are y'all doing? Maybe we'll bring that back for future things. But Amelia and Sherrick say, what the fuck are y'all doing?
Oh, God.
So before we get into that, is there anything, Amelia, that are there any highlights for your week? Anything that you want to any, victories or things that you've overcome that you want to discuss, or just, pat yourself on the back for, any of that kind of stuff? I want to uplift you for a sec here. It's okay if not,
really.
But
by the time you'll be listening to this, I will have graduated from the second level of coach training.
Yeah, see, that's great.
So that's cool.
Buddy.
And now I just need to get my hours in so that I can apply for credential.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that for you.
So, yep, that's pretty much it. Oh, our the program director sent out a survey to everybody who's graduating this semester. And it was getting your home address and stuff to send you your certificate or whatever, but then it was also if you want to write something about any of your fellow graduates, something nice or acknowledgments or whatever, you can do that. And I probably took it way too seriously. And by that I mean I didn't start until the night before because I knew it was going to take a lot of thought, and I wanted to be very nice and say something nice about everybody. And so I didn't do it till the night before it was due, and then I got halfway through it and it was 2.5 hours later, and I was like, well, fuck. I guess I'm gonna go to bed and finish this tomorrow and it'll be late. Oops. Anyway, and I had a call with the program director this morning about some other stuff. And she was like, I just want to acknowledge you. You're very thoughtful and eloquent, and you're a very good writer. And I was like, shut the fuck up. No, I outwardly was like, thank you. That's so nice. And inside I was like, shut the fuck up. So yeah, that was a nice little thing today. But anyway.
I sent you and also Stephanie something on Messenger that I thought you might find amusing.
Okay. The fuck?
This can stay in the podcast, JM, but just
I don't know who these people are, but
okay. So I don't know who the person that he's sitting in the lap of, but that's
okay.
renowned, probably the the man who has won my favorite wrestler 17 years in a row, even though he hasn't been wrestling that long, Big E.
Oh, okay.
It's a very like 90s-esque photo.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert that this is probably the closest that we'll get to an off it today. I
Mm-hmm.
just we agreed, I think, that it wasn't appropriate to do one for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So no, Amelia, what the fuck is this for this week? Also, I found out that like I need to go and re-add all of the past couple of ones because they never got posted.
Oh.
So I apologize for those who were like listening to the podcast and went to go look to our Instagram and they weren't there. I was fully of the thought that they had made it up there, but they're not. So I got I got a little bit of a fun time ahead of me going back and seeing how far back they haven't posted. So
Yeah, check our notifications and stuff too, because I feel like I saw a notification that we might have gotten one pulled
okay.
because
Yeah,
of
it's something. Yeah, I'm sure
copyright or
somebody.
whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure that's probably been the case. But
So
so yeah, apologies for that. We do what I can, but finding stuff on the internet, you never really know what you're gonna get. So
mm-hmm.
like I said, we do our best about those, but I will promise I will get the ones that haven't been up. It's just gonna take me a little bit because it's a little bit of research on like which one for which episode, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, so as far as myself, I mean, a really good friend of mine announced that they now officially work as the community manager for Critical Role, which, for those of you who don't know, it's like essentially like one of the biggest names in like tabletop actual play
Mm-hmm.
stuff right now. They have like their own like game out and all that good stuff. They're very, very popular in that particular space. So for them to be able to say that they work for them as the community manager is pretty great. So it's not necessarily a win for me, but it is a win for me because I support and love that person. So
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that's that. Very excited for C2E2, which is by the time you're listening to this, right around the corner. I think it's actually probably getting posted like by the time we're gonna be in there. So
Yeah.
that's cool and great and great and cool. I have a fun cosplay idea for that. I would love to have more than one, but it's C2E2 has always been this thing for me where like I'm like, ooh, I want to take 3 costumes down there because we're down there 3 days. And then we
Mm-hmm.
get down there and I'm like, I just want, you know what? You know what? I think I will wear it one day and one day only, and that's how I'm feeling about it. And that's the end of
Yeah.
that, like.
Yeah,
So.
I'm struggling with that too because one of the ideas I had, what I remember from being there once,
Mm,
is being warm all day. So the couple ideas I've had include like a large sweater or coat, and I'm like, that sounds terrible.
mm-hmm. It's rough because, and like I say this, like we were joking about this before we hit record, like it's in like the 70s ish right now
Mhm.
in our respective locales. But like I
Mhm.
remember from previous times going to C2E2, it's rough because it's like you're cold because you're walking to the bus stop or you're
Mhm.
getting there one way or another and you're cold, and then you get inside and it's like, oh, because there's so many people
Mhm.
just moving, there's so much air being pushed around, and not in like the fan kind of a way.
Mhm.
There's so much body heat in one place that
Mhm.
it's like you immediately swing the pendulum in the opposite direction. It's
Yeah.
just like, holy shit, it's so warm in here, can we calm it down please?
Yeah.
you know so it's like you got to be a bit conscious about that, because it's like I remember the first time I went, I think it was like it was even earlier in the year. I think it was like February, like late February or so,
Mhm.
because it was like right before like COVID shut everything down.
Mhm.
And I wore like my Power Rangers costume, and I was so like regretting not having anything like underneath it until I got in there, and then I was like, oh man, this is, thank
Now it's too
goodness.
much. Yeah.
Now, because now it's almost like too much.
Mhm.
So but yeah, so that's great. The Dune TTRPG is going well. By the time you're hearing this, we will be fully into Spelljammer over at Feywild. That's cool and great. Got some cool stuff planned, for that. So yeah. I'm having a good time with that. So that's where I'm at. And with that all being said, we're gonna get into the topic now. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's gonna be a hard episode. This episode we're gonna cover. We'll just pull the band-aid off now and say we're covering Quiet on Set. If you haven't watched it, I think this is one of those times that I will say for sure you probably should pause this episode and go
Yeah.
experience it, because we're not going to be able to give you everything that
Mm-hmm.
occurs, but we are going to
Mm-hmm.
give you our take on it, because I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important that we talk about it. Like, I know that like
Mm-hmm.
we're a fun pop culture podcast, but like
This is
this,
pop
I think
culture.
this is, well, I was gonna say this is a perfect intersection of pop culture, but also like this is like, this is when keeping it, we're keeping it real, and
Mm-hmm.
not everything that happens in pop culture is like randomness and sunshine and rainbows.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be discussions about, inappropriate things with minors. There's going to be discussions about SA. There's going to be discussions, if you don't know what the shorthand of SA is, it's sexual assault or sexual
Mm-hmm.
abuse.
Mm-hmm.
You learn these things on TikTok because, like, especially like true crime TikTok, it's like they obviously can't say some of these words, so they find fun ways to get around it by saying things like SA, or the one that is like, it's not funny, but it's like kind like it's not funny ha ha, it's just like funny wow.
Mm-hmm.
Like grape, like,
Oh, I haven't heard that one, but that I
yeah,
get it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like to say, or unaliving, or some people would be like deleting, like to reference someone who has died. They deleted themselves if they did that kind of thing. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it may sound like I'm laughing about it. It's not funny. It's just like
Yeah.
it's interesting that like that's like a subset of culture to be like, we want to talk about this thing on a platform that won't allow us to talk about this thing. So
Mm-hmm.
let's move around it. So we'll put, of course, if these kinds of warnings will be in the show notes. So obviously if you're listening to this and you didn't read the show notes, they're there, I promise.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so there are five, I'm gonna say there's 4 episodes in all. I know that there's a 5th episode, but that's really kind of just like an interview. It kind of steps away from the rest of the series in terms of
Mm-hmm.
formatting. It's kind of just like Soledad O'Brien having a conversation with some of the people
Mm-hmm.
in reflection of the feedback of the first 4 episodes. So it's kind of like that,
Yeah.
like it's kind of like a look back, if you will. I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
like it officially says there's 5 episodes. I'm going to say it's 4 in a look back, but that's just me personally. And it focuses heavily and specifically on Nickelodeon, which,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know, is like one of the largest like you know features of children's television from,
Mm-hmm.
like, I want to say like the late 70s until today,
Yeah.
because I believe that Nickelodeon officially became a thing like 1979, I want to say.
Something like that, yeah. If you are at all interested in learning more about that, I highly, highly, highly recommend the book called Slimed, An Oral
Mm-hmm.
History of Nickelodeon's Golden Age.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of takes you through like the very beginnings of Nickelodeon and like into the 90s, but ends, I would say, before kind of all this stuff in the documentary happens. So,
Yeah.
um,
So we're not going to go like in a full history of Nickelodeon, but this focuses specifically on what Amelia was referring to as like its golden age, which coincides with like Dan Schneider coming to be a producer slash showrunner on Nickelodeon.
yeah,
Um,
I wouldn't call that the golden age, but
Fair
and that's
enough.
not what the book refers to as the golden age.
Okay, that's totally fair. I'm thinking of like, because
But
like
that
Dan
is
Schneider coming to Nickelodeon, I think is definitely like a
it's a
boom
high
period for
point.
Nickelodeon.
It's a high point for sure, and at least for viewership, money, capitalism. I will say it also kind of coincides with when Nickelodeon leaves Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. If you watched Nickelodeon as a child and in the early to mid 90s, like every show at the end would be like, this was filmed live at
True.
Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. So like I have that phrase in my head.
Yes.
Yeah, and they moved to California in the like mid 2000s or late 90s, I think. So I'm sure it doesn't have anything to do with it, but it just is weird that it like kind of coincides with that whole era. So I will say I just want to like criticize one thing. Well, criticize is a harsh word. I just want to note one thing at the beginning, that this is called Quiet on Set, the dark side of kids TV or something like that.
Yeah.
And to me, I would have preferred it had something in the title that indicated that it was about this kind of specific time period or specific network or something.
True.
Because that title, I was expecting going into it, I hadn't heard like anything about it, just a lot of people being like, oh my god, have you watched this yet?
Right.
I went into it thinking it was gonna be like an overview of like children's TV, so like several decades.
Yeah.
And it really and this is not a criticism about what it's about. I think that like there 4 episodes wasn't even enough, from what I understand, to talk about everything that happened in these years at Nickelodeon specifically. So I'm not saying that it should have been an overview. I'm just saying that like the title was a little too generic for me personally.
Yes. It's a bit clickbaity because it you know, and I will say that like, because when you started saying like I'm gonna give this a criticism, I was gonna say I have several.
Well,
so, but
it was more like I backtracked on the word criticism for this because I wasn't. I don't really feel like it's a huge problem to me. It was more just like something to note that just kind of like I didn't love.
And that's the thing, I think that like, you know, going back to a thing I was saying earlier, like it's a bit evocative of television now, is that like it's kind of like we're gonna say this thing to get your eyes on this, and then you're gonna be in it, which like I want to put a bookmark in this specifically because I did, while I was doing a little bit of research on this, I did note that there was an interview that Mark Summers, who was famously a host of like What Would You Do and Double Dare on Nickelodeon, basically said that like what he was described that it was going to be and what it ended up being once he was like there talking to the producers and holding the interview, he claims they were very different. So like that's something to kind of note. We'll get back to that later. I just don't want to jump around too much. But like I kind of said, like we kind of start off with episode 1 just kind of setting the scene of like Dan Schneider, who Dan Schneider is as a person, which like I don't really want to get too deep into. Like I said, we're not going to cover like every single like piece and nook and cranny of this because like that, like I mean, you just like if you can stomach the content, we highly recommend that you watch it. We totally understand if not, but you know, it just kind of goes into who Dan Schneider is, where it sets the scene of him as a former actor. He's a bigger guy. So like in you know, in those late 80s, early 90s, he's definitely the butt of a joke for being a bigger guy. Like that's kind of just the thing that it is. It's not really, it's kind of like a Chris Farley, but like it's making fun of him rather than him making fun of himself, more of a thing, you know? And he begins to work at Nickelodeon, and he gets his big first hit as a showrunner and producer with All That, which if you're unfamiliar with All That, it was essentially described as like SNL for kids, you know? So it's like a sketch comedy show, but like the majority of the people that are on the show doing the jokes and such are children. So, you know, Amanda Bynes, Kenan Thompson, Kel Mitchell, you know, those are like the hugest names, if you will, that like came
Mm-hmm.
out of Lori Beth Denberg. I'm trying to remember the guy, Tamborelli last name, Danny
Oh,
Tamborelli.
Danny. Yep.
Danny Tamborelli, who then, you know, who was also on the Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Mm-hmm.
There were a huge amount of kids, you know, that came out of that particular show. You know, obviously Keenan and Kel got their own show as a result of that. I didn't know this, but it's kind of obvious now that like Dan also produced the Keenan and Kel film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Good
like that was
Burger.
kind of
Yeah.
his thing. So, but yeah, basically it starts off with the, you know, I'm just gonna try and name as many people as I can, because like I don't want anybody to think that like I'm at de-emphasizing anybody, but like obviously we don't, you know, we
Mm-hmm.
want to make this as concise as we can, but you know, not leave anybody out. So like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, other names include like Angelique Bates, Katrina Johnson, who like, side note, completely unrelated. When I was a kid, Katrina Johnson, I thought was the funniest person on the planet, and obviously that endeared me to her. She did a very good Ross Perot impression.
She did, yes.
So they just dressed her as Ross Perot. Quite possibly the funniest thing I had ever experienced as a child, and it still kind of holds up as funny
Mm-hmm.
today. Looking back on that, Elisa Reyes, Josh Server. Josh Server, I believe, was Pizza Face.
Oh, yep.
Like
Mm-hmm.
they literally just put like a prosthetic pizza on his face and then just like did some makeup so that he was, you know, on there. He was also the longest he was the only cast member to be on all 6 seasons of the original version of all that, which I thought was interesting. I truly wonder if he continued acting. Let's see. I mean, yeah, he's done some stuff still. Like he's done some TV stuff as recently as 2022. So there's that. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep out of the weeds on that. But like all of that was like the thing that like really kind of endeared Dan to Nickelodeon and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really showed that like he could really like basically like Nickelodeon kind of exploded in part of the shows that came out of what was called Schneider's Bakery, which is what Dan Schneider's production company is called, I should say. I think it still technically exists. So it starts basically kind of talking about that, and we learn a lot about like the behind the curtain stuff, specifically through a couple of writers, Christy Stratton and Jenny Kilgan, who kind of talk about how like they were kind of just given an opportunity to work on all of that, and then they were basically told that they had to share a salary, which is like a hugely like, you know, a thing that just, yeah, Amelia is like like rubbing her eye, like I don't know if it's because of this nonsense or just generally, but like it's it sounds so fucking disgusting. Like
Well, okay, so I don't know. Do we want to do like an overview of the whole thing and then talk about our thoughts, or how do we want to plug in our thoughts?
that's a fair thought. I kind of just wanted to just set up like what, like use the first episode to kind of just set up like what the series kind of goes through, and then we can kind of
Okay.
plug it in from there.
Okay.
You know, because I was gonna say like it's disgusting how they basically were just like, oh well, you can share a salary, and then also we're gonna, you know, have all these inappropriate things go on, and then we transition to stuff that was kind of happening kind of just like sort of in front of the camera, like hidden in plain sight kind of things, like the way that like certain actors were treated and how Amanda was like treated, not just like
Mm-hmm.
in because the first 2 episodes they kind of very quickly take a right turn into just being like Amanda, the Amanda show,
Yeah.
like, and it
Well,
almost felt
and
like,
yeah.
oh, are we just going to talk about Amanda Bynes specifically, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So I'll pause there. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. Keep going.
Okay. It's just like it focuses a good chunk on Amanda for a bit, and we kind of get the idea of just how like I'm just going to use the word disgusting. Just disgusting how the writing room was, how toxic it was, in the sense that, like, you know, through the lens of those two writers, we're kind of told about how, like, they would pitch an idea and then Dan would say, well, pretend that you're being essayed over a desk while you're telling this bit. Or, like, he would create a character named Penelope Taint, which it is exactly how it sounds. And he would have Amanda herself play this character. And this is admittedly something from, like, a several TikToks that I saw, that, like, these are just, like, the way that they interpreted it. So I'm just going to say that, like, Penelope's character would always say please towards the end of things. Like, I want to see Amanda now, please. Like, my name is Penelope Taint, please. Like, that would be the thing. And so the fan site that Penelope creates for Amanda, which at the time was a legitimate, actual, real website you could go to, was called amandaplease.com, which they were like, amandaplease.com. Like,
Yikes.
Yeah, it's a cringe and 3/4 at minimum, you know? So, like, and there were, like, videos where you could see, like, just random isolated photos of Amanda's body, like, just like, this is Amanda's belly button and this is Amanda's big toe. And it was like from a kid's perspective, they're naive and they just think it's funny that, like, you know, like, ew, feet, or like, ew, a belly button. But, like, to anyone else that looks at this, what? Like, you know, like, obviously the videos no longer exist. Like, the website is extremely broken if it's still up now. You could probably see some of the stuff in the Wayback Machine if you wanted to go looking for it. Trust me, I did not. I did not. Never. But it just kind of, and like, they highlight a little bit of just how, just how, like, kingmaker Dan is.
Yeah.
In the sense of, like, he could just say, oh, you know what? You aren't really doing what I want. So guess what? You're off the set. Or if, like, a specific thing being like, oh, well, a child's parent would be like, I don't like that joke. I don't like the way that this is going. And they would be outspoken about it. And then the producers would pull that parent aside and be like, kind of just like, basically like, listen, shut the fuck up or we're going to get you out of here. You know? And, like,
yeah.
Go on.
And yeah, like, just talking about how he had hit after hit after hit of shows, essentially. And so, yeah, was given a lot of power and leeway to do what he wanted. And that created, an atmosphere where it was like, if you were outspoken about anything, if you weren't a go along with it person, you could easily be fired. And so it created a lot of yes men on the set, essentially.
Yeah. So, like, and they don't officially interview Dan at any point during this documentary, but he does, whether it was, you know, through a representative or what, he does have some things that get said. Like, he has responses to some of the accusations that are levied at him. And it always felt kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of felt just manufactured in general. Cause, like, there were times in which, the documentary would levy these accusations at Dan, and then they would kind of just say, and this is what he had to say about it. And it was just kind of a very, like, flimsy excuse.
Yeah, it was a very just, like, typical apology through a publicist statement kind of a thing, or a denial of the accusations. I don't know if you watched his quote unquote apology video.
Sort of, and I'll get to that, but I want you to say your piece.
Okay, so I did watch it prior to watching the 5th episode, because I knew it would be referenced. And yeah, I mean, not to get too far ahead, but as somebody says in the 5th episode, like, he started as an actor, and this felt like a performance. And it did. It absolutely felt like a performance from him and the other person in the video who, oh God. Anyway,
the reason that I said sort of is because I had it on while I not the interview itself, but I had someone covering that interview on while I was walking Blue one day, and I didn't get all the way through it. Shout out to Swoop specifically. Swoop is a YouTube documentarian who does fantastic work. I think that they are incredibly concise, also very funny. And they covered Dan's thing, which like it was. I mean, to kind of lay this out for y'all. It was an interview that Dan did specifically on his own YouTube channel, and he found a child actor who is now an adult that was willing to co-sign and give him softball questions and very minimal pushback, to what he had to say in response to those questions. What's happening? You okay?
Yeah, no, I'm looking up that guy because I don't think he was a child actor.
The guy that was in the video says, "I'm Boogie from."
Yeah, but I don't think he was
show.
A child.
Oh, was he not? Okay.
That's what I'm looking up.
I was gonna say it was like iCarly or something, so like teenager maybe. I guess I assumed child actor. Like I say, child actor is like under 18, but like that's totally fair.
I'm looking because I'm making sure.
You're correct.
He was in his 20s.
Okay. All right. So to correct myself, thank you, Amelia, for looking that up. But so he got an actor who was in his 20s that was on the Amanda show, or sorry, not the Amanda show, iCarly. That would be willing to co-sign him, right? As far as like, and provide very little pushback to what he had to say.
And the video starts with this guy who's known as Boogie. That is his credited name, apparently. Mm-hmm. He starts it and basically says, like, I saw this series and I immediately reached out to my good friend Dan Schneider to find out, like, how he was feeling about it and if he had watched it, and then was like, we should do something because this is an important topic to talk about. And Dan is like, yeah, it was so nice of you to reach out to me. And it just felt like so fake. It just felt like he didn't. Maybe he did, but like this didn't come about because this friend of yours that was on your show, iCarly, like came and said, hey, let's do this. This is all you. And it isn't just you sitting in front of a camera doing an apology video like a lot of them are. Right. You did this, and I'm going to say
you
allegedly.
Wanted to soften the blow of it in this way.
Allegedly, but
yeah.
He picked somebody from his shows that is a black man so that he could show his quote-unquote diversity, because that was also one of the allegations against him.
True. Which gets covered in the 5th episode a little bit as well. Yeah. But like, so I watched Swoop basically kind of just break down this situation, and like, just from like a journalistic perspective, if Dan was taking this seriously, in my humble opinion, you don't pick Boogie to interview you. No. Find somebody from like, and I know that people are like feeling one way or another about quote unquote the mainstream media or whatever, but like talk to Soledad O'Brien, like, or like talk to somebody who is like a journalist who will ask you actual questions and not just go, oh, I get it. Okay, I understand.
Pick somebody not employed by Viacom.
Yeah, who is not part of like Paramount or Viacom or any of, like, you basically, and also don't do it on your own fucking YouTube channel. Like, it was, I like Dan. If it's not attributed to Dan as an actor, it's attributed to Dan as a producer, as somebody who knows how this shit works. The fact is, like anybody that takes an objective lens to this, in my opinion, will see that he did it with somebody who worked on his shows,
Mm-hmm.
is a black person,
Mm-hmm.
on his own YouTube channel, and does not ask him really any tough questions.
No.
And when he does ask him a tough question, Dan gives a fucking bullshit answer.
Yep.
And then the interviewer, Boogie in this case, just goes, "Oh, okay, I get it." Like if I had watched this video by itself and I heard the interviewer say, "So this happened, huh, Dan? Not cool, man. You've lost me. You've lost me."
Yes, the moment that he started the interview with like, so there's some talk about the writer's room and that like your behavior in the writer's room was not great. That's not cool, Dan. Fuck off. That's not cool.
And Dan just goes, "Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. And I should have done this. And I should have done that." Like,
not letting somebody sit with you at lunch in high school is not cool.
It's not cool, yeah.
Fucking making 2 female writers share a salary, which he claims he had nothing to do with salaries, and which is bullshit. Showrunners do. And that, like, having them act out sexual acts for no reason because they're making a children's television show. That's not cool.
Yeah,
that's more than not cool.
Yeah, it's criminal. Is what it is.
Yes,
it's criminal.
Fuck off, Boogie.
It's a like I said, I was listening to this through the filter of Swoop, and it was actively hard to listen to because and as Brian and Giovanni say in episode 5, like, and I think even Shane Lyons says it, who he basically wasn't really in the documentary, but like came forward with additional things to say as a result of the documentary, the first 4 episodes. They basically were like, this is the behavior of somebody who's like not taking accountability, because Dan, in the interview and in the documentary, he basically says, well, there were tons of people around, and there were people on 2 coasts that I had to run the costumes by, and I had to run these jokes by, and they all thought, like, that doesn't fucking matter, because we're talking about a cult of personality here, where they go, Dan has created this show and it is doing gangbusters. Do you think that some fucking like corporate asshat in New York is going to go say, oh, but they squirted goo on Jamie Lynn Spears' face? That's a little weird. Like, they're not going to say that. They're looking at the ratings and going, they squirted goo on Jamie Lynn Spears' face. And what were the ratings for that episode?
Do it again.
How much?
Yeah,
fucking make it white this time. Like, you know, like...
Yeah, I mean,
that's not an excuse.
It's not. I'm sure he's right in that it, like, everything does go through executives.
Oh yeah, I don't think he's lying. What I'm saying is it doesn't matter.
But exactly, the level of, like, I'm just so tired of people saying, like, if this was wrong, why didn't anybody say no? Or if this was bad, why didn't you say no? Or why didn't you fight back? Because
he was taking
fucking pressure for jobs, societal pressure, like, fucking, there's just so many layers to all this shit. And, like, again, because they talk to this mother in the 5th episode.
Who was also in the documentary, for what it's worth.
Yes.
But go on.
And said, like, they asked her something about, like, would you do anything differently, or what would you tell, like, a mother of a kid who wants to act now, or something like that. And it was basically like, I would tell them to do it. I would still tell them to do it. If they got cast on a show, I would still tell them to do it. But I would tell them to not, like, to basically, like, if something starts happening, to pull them out. To know that that's the right thing to do, rather than to, like, cave to stuff you feel uncomfortable about because it'll keep your kid on the show or a
Right.
star or whatever. That it is, her point was basically like, it is, your kid is too important to like put in harm's way so that they can be a star.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting that you bring up the idea of pressure, because I do talk about it in episode 5, not only from like basically refuting Dan's claim that like he was all about diversity, because it was like there's one black child that is male presenting and there's one black child that is female presenting, and that's roughly it.
Yep. Yeah, they talked about like they were the only 2 black people on set, meaning not just cast but crew.
And then he said 4 if you include our mothers. Like, so like not only the pressure for that, but like the mom that Amelia brought up is Brian Hearn's mom.
Yes. And
she actively talks about how their experience working with Dan caused a rift in like the mother-son relationship that was not like repaired until this year. Until
the documentary, until they saw the documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
They were at odds until the documentary came out. Like, so because Brian's mom would see stuff happening and she would raise hell about it, as is her right and as what she should do. And basically, as alleged by the documentary, so I'll say allegedly here, you know, all of this is stuff that we're saying, unless we say like, no, this is verbatim exactly for sure, is alleged. But like, the producers basically said, we're not going to bring Brian back. And Brian, as a child, connects my mom was raising hell on set to I don't have this job anymore that I loved.
Yeah.
And he put the 2 together.
Yeah.
And she even says it like that was the moment I lost he lost trust in me.
Yep.
He no longer wanted me to be his manager. He no longer believed that I had his best interests at heart. Like, and to say that like, oh, well, you know, this person thought it was funny or that person thought it was funny, so why didn't they step in the way? Bullshit. It's 1,000% bullshit. Like, you know, it's not the irony of there being like maybe at max until at least throughout the amount of time that this documentary covers that happened in real life, like maybe 3 black people on set at any given time. And I'm thinking of like season 1 of All That, because it was like Keenan and Kel and then like Angelique was on there.
Yep.
And then they moved, and then when Keenan and Kel moved on to their own show, they didn't really like fill them in with like other black people. It was like maybe 2 here and there, you know, like.
Well, and as Brian Hearn's mom points out too, like, okay, so they had a black child of 2 genders and they felt that was enough. And she's like, well, first of all, no, that's not enough. And second of all, like, that doesn't even go toward like that. They only went that far. Like they only hired these 2 black children, but they didn't hire any indigenous children or any Latino
Hispanic,
children or any Asian children. Like diversity isn't just one token.
And also, like, this is something that they kind of touched on just a little bit, but like they have Brian Hearn dressed in this uncomfortable spandex outfit while he's like, you know, essentially going through puberty. It's like, you know, there's just a lot of like weird shit that got passed as like, well, the producers didn't think it wasn't funny or inappropriate, and no one on set said anything, which like, of course, all these parents and these children and people are fearing for their jobs, because all it takes is for Dan to say, I don't want them on set anymore, and you never work for Nickelodeon again.
Yeah. It's not like, that you don't work on that show anymore. You don't work on the network anymore, and you might not work in TV at all.
Right. You know, so like that's a huge part of it. And then we get a little bit away from the weirdness of like how Amanda Bynes was handled, which like we didn't talk about this, but I went back and I watched some interviews that Amanda did for like other outlets. Okay. So like, you know, like your Craig, I can't remember his name, Craig Robinson. I don't remember. He's a a white guy. He had like a late night talk show on for a
Craig
time.
Ferguson,
thank you.
Yeah.
So she did Craig Ferguson, and she was on with like Conan, and she was on with like all these other like old white people.
When was this? When she was on the Amanda Show?
Yeah, like when she was on the Amanda Show / like, I'm saying like this is like before she had turned 18.
Okay.
I'm talking like 13 to 18 years old.
Got it.
She's doing these she's doing these interviews, she's going on these shows, and all they want to fucking talk about is who is she dating and her body and it's like Craig Ferguson says some shit about like she's like wearing a jacket. I think she had just turned 18 or something like that. And she says that she's wearing a jacket that she had gotten when she was 15 or 16. And Craig is like remarking on it. And she's like, I should take it off because like, obviously she's uncomfortable. And he's talking about this jacket and how it looks on her. And he's like, he says something to the effect of like, oh, no, keep it on. And then come back when you're 21 and then you can take it off. And it was just like, Craig, what the fuck, bro? Like,
well, and again, like this isn't new, right?
No.
Like, the Britney Spears documentary talked about all this shit. Like, we've been doing this crap forever, and it's gross. And I think, they focus on Amanda because, A, she was probably the biggest star to come out of this.
I wouldn't say probably. I would say she was.
Yeah. Because, like, again, is kind of the only one who had a career outside of Nickelodeon in a lot of ways. Except Kenan, I guess.
Yeah.
And I suppose Ariana Grande. Grande might be the biggest, but
okay, I'll grant you that. Yeah, I'll grant you that for sure. Yeah. So I would say it's like Ariana, and then I'd say like if Amanda had kept going, which like I'm not advocating for that at all. No. I would think she'd be on par with Kenan.
Yeah,
but like but
she was, But given like what has happened to her in the last few years.
Absolutely not. I totally understand why she would want to crawl in a hole and never be seen again.
Right,
like,
but I'm just saying that like that's of course why they also focused on her. Like not only is she like one of the biggest stars to come out of this, but also like this fucked her up more publicly, more outwardly than maybe anyone else, except Drake,
which we'll get into now. So there were conversations and things being levied at people at Nickelodeon specifically over several instances in which active and in the case of at least Jason Michael Handy, self-admitted pedophiles were working in and around Nickelodeon's like areas in which there were children present and there were blind spots.
Well, okay. And then to learn, like not to skip around too much, but again, this is another thing that Brian Hearn's mother said in the 5th episode is that was it her or no, maybe it was somebody else, but somebody in the 5th episode talked about how like there's a loophole in the laws.
It was Shane Lyons that said that.
Yes. Okay. You're right. There's a loophole in the laws about how he didn't say this part, but the law is that anyone under 18 on a film set, TV set, whatever, has to have a parent or guardian present at all times. Now, the law technically says that they're supposed to be in the room at all times. But as we learned throughout these episodes, and I'm sure in other places, that the parents weren't always in the room. And correct. Again, like, it sounds like a lot of that was because pressure from production to be like, you're in the way. And again, it was a lot of like, don't speak up. Don't get in our way. Don't like whatever. So I don't feel right saying like, well, the parents should have been in the room like the law says, because again, there's so many layers to this. But that there's a loophole that basically says because the kids' parents are there, like they don't have to background
check
people?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the actual fuck?
Mm-hmm. Because
That's
because Amelia, background checks cost money, and it costs time.
Okay, as an HR person, I just want to say, background checks are not that expensive.
But they cost money.
They do cost money. That's true.
And they cost time.
So do lawsuits and criminal investigations.
100%. But they are also hoping that they don't have to deal with those. It's the calculated risk. Like, I'm not playing devil's advocate here. I'm saying, like, this is like a direct result of all of the capitalistic like bullshit that we deal with.
And
corners get cut with Boeing and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Like, I don't want to get into that, but like, you get the idea.
Yeah, but that was one of his. He was like, that's like the first thing we need to do is like close that loophole, make sure people get background check, and that people who have been, criminally charged with the child molestation don't get to work on any set. Not even, he didn't even say just like kids.
Period. Yeah,
set.
period.
He said
100%.
just any set. And I'm like,
you're out of Hollywood, bro. See you later. Like,
oh my God.
That is that. And so like to kind of go over to kind of close that gap that came from us kind of going off on not the tangent, but like filling that information in, is that for a very long time there was a known lawsuit against Brian Peck, but they didn't know who was on the other side of it. It was a John Doe essentially. And this documentary reveals that it was Drake Bell. Yeah.
Was it a lawsuit or a criminal case?
Might have been a criminal case.
I think it's a criminal case.
Criminal case.
Not a civil one. Yeah. So,
yes,
for a long time, like, it has been public knowledge that this person, Brian Peck, who has worked on multiple TV shows, including several on Nickelodeon, was involved in a criminal case in the late 2000s, alleging that he sexually abused a child actor. But because it was a child actor, their identity was protected. Because they were a child, not just because they were a child actor. Their identity was protected. So the public has known about this for 15 years.
But didn't know
who it was until this documentary came out and found out it was Drake Bell from Drake and Josh
and the Amanda Show.
Yeah.
Because he got his start on the Amanda Show.
Yes, they both did. Yeah.
Which is so interesting because they were showing photos of the cast and Drake is right fucking there. And it's like, if that isn't like the most interesting bit of foreshadowing to come through, like... Because like they're focusing on Amanda, but it's like not far from Amanda is Drake is standing right there.
Yeah.
Like, and I didn't know this because like by the time that like Brian Peck kind of was an on-camera figure, like the Pickle Boy stuff and all that stuff, like I was well out. Like, I had moved on to like other television.
So much of this was like news to me, and not just because it was news to everybody, but like I stopped watching Nickelodeon probably in like 96, 7. And at that point, Dan Schneider was like part of all that, but hadn't really yet started his own shows. So this era that we're talking about in this documentary, it's like I completely missed this. I never watched the Amanda Show. I never watched Drake and Josh. I never watched iCarly, all these different things. And I'd heard of them, but it took me years to figure out that Ariana Grande had been on Nickelodeon before she was Ariana Grande.
Yeah.
So, it's like I missed all of this.
So to clarify, and not to say that you said anything wrong or anything like that, but like, so Dan basically went from all that, and then while he was running all that, he moved and created, Zoe 101.
He was never running all that.
Okay. Well, he
was
like
he
was a
he was
producer.
a writer and a
Sorry.
producer.
Thank
but
you.
he didn't
But he
become a
created-
showrunner and creator
Yes.
until after that. Yeah.
Thank you. You're 100,000% correct. So then while he was essentially the producer for that, he created Zoe 101, iCarly, which kind of overlapped each other. Zoe 101 only ran for 4 seasons, 3 years. iCarly ran through 2007 to 2012. Victorious overlapped that. Sam and Cat overlapped, like was right after Victorious ended. And then he created a show which I had never heard of. The next 3 ones, Henry Danger. I heard of Game Shakers, I think, because it was the one that like brought Kel Mitchell back to Nickelodeon.
Oh, okay.
I had heard it and I was like, oh, Kel Mitchell is back. That's fucking cool. And like, then I moved on with my life. Like I just did. It was like, I'm not going to watch it or anything. I didn't like actively say it. It was just like a thing that I just didn't do. And then The Adventures of Kid Danger, which is like his most recent thing. And that was like right around the time that Nickelodeon was like, we're going to step away from Dan now.
Yeah.
Which I can't. Okay. So yeah. So apparently it is also based on the Henry Danger television show, which like is funny because it was like they were essentially running kind of concurrently. I'm sure that like when they parted ways with Dan, they moved on to like they just they kept it. But Henry Danger ran from 2014 to 2020, and Kid Danger was only 1 season in 2018. So that's just the thing to kind of note. But like the thing that I really want to focus on is that like the situation with Drake, it kind of really kind of hard pivots into just talking about like what happened with him, where like his dad was his manager, his parents weren't together anymore. And his dad was like eagle-eyed on Brian Peck, was like, I don't like this guy. He's 40 something years old and he has this weird interest in my son who is
and he's
in his
like
teens.
Hanging out with all the kids all the time.
Right. He's like taking them out. He's taking them to like Disney such and such. Like as a side note, the Schneider's Bakery Wikipedia article is semi-protected right now. I wonder why. I'm sure Dan's is also. Yes, it is. But he just had this very like his allegedly his interest and his desire to hang around all these child actors more than like, actors of his own age, which like I have a bit of a unique experience in this era as someone who is an actor who has worked with children. I have zero interest in hanging out with them in any capacity. Yeah. Unless their dad or mom are present. In which case, like if they're like, oh, we're going to go to this restaurant. Do you want to come with? It's like, all right, that's fine. But like, I don't want to be around your kids. Like I have zero interest in it. Like I loved doing like Seussical and Shrek and Luchadora and all the First Stage shows. But like, there's a reason that like, and I speak to like the companies that I've worked with. There's a reason that they do a fantastic job of making sure that the adults have their own space and the kids have their own space. And there's really no reason for us to intermingle. We go on stage together, we rehearse together, and then we separate, and that's it. So like. For Brian to want to be around these kids and be like, oh, I'll take you to Disneyland or Disney World or whatever. And like.
Yeah. And.
Without their parents present, like.
Yeah. And that this was not unique. Like, this is what he would do on all sets. Is he would hang out with the kids. He would joke with the kids. He would say things like, I'm a big kid who's never grown up. Like, as if that made it all okay. And yeah, I mean, I don't know that we need to get like super far into details. Because yeah, again, you should watch it if you are able to. But essentially, yeah, was able to work his way into Drake's life to the point where kind of got his dad pushed out of his life in a lot of ways.
He precisely and surgically made it so that Drake started second guessing his own dad and his dad's interests in his career, and made it so that his mom, who like Drake has defended his mother, so I got nothing unnice to say about this lady, but like he made it so that the parent who like wasn't as involved, like as involved and experienced in the situation, was actively in charge. And then she was like, well, I don't want to have to drive him all the way to this for rehearsal and that.
Yeah, because she lived
and then all of a sudden,
away. And,
right. And then Brian was like, I'll do it. Me. Like,
yeah. So all of a sudden he was staying at Brian's house a lot. I can I can so see how this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Drake talks about how like this abuse went on for a very long time, and that it wasn't until his girlfriend's mother like noticed something was up.
Yeah, who I won't say, but like fucking TikTok detectives, man, they were on the fucking case. They were like,
I'm sure.
Who was Drake dating at this time, and whose mom was it? And like,
it just like, I mean, I'm with you on like Drake hasn't said that he has a good relationship with his mother.
No, he said he has a good relationship.
That's what he said. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you said didn't. I was
yeah.
like, hold on. He did actually
Drake
say that,
has said that he has a good relationship with his mother. Okay. And so I don't want to have anything against her. But just imagine being his mother and it taking his girlfriend's mother, who's met him like twice, to figure out something was up. That would feel shitty, I think.
I do kind of want to go over his conversation on how that happened, though, because I thought it was so fascinating. And that like they were like he started staying over at his girlfriend's place more and more often because it felt safe to him.
I don't think he stayed over, but he went to her house a lot.
Yeah, we'll say. Yeah, I don't exactly remember the wording, so I'll take that. But like he was watching a movie at her place, and Brian was like calling his cell phone repeatedly, and Drake wasn't picking up. So he started calling his girlfriend's place, which is like, to me, that's like straight out of a fucking horror film. Like not like a supernatural horror film, but like one of those horror films where it's like this person feels like they are a supervillain because of the ability for them to know, like, well, I'm going to call your girlfriend's mom, your girlfriend's place now because you have to pick up, and I want to talk to you, you know? And so, like, basically the girlfriend's mom pulling him into the kitchen and being like, what the fuck is happening? And Drake being like, well, like, obviously I can totally understand. I like not necessarily like fully in his shoes, but like I can get like his age feeling so powerless and feeling like he can't say anything to anybody or not wanting to say anything to anybody. Right. Going, oh no, it's fine. And she's like, no 40-something-year-old man calls my girlfriend's boyfriend, my daughter's boyfriend, like that. Like that was like such a.
And I feel like that wasn't like, that sounds a little possessive, but it also was just like, no 40-year-old man should be calling a teenage boy like this. Like this is just fucking weird.
Yes.
It's not just this specific, but like.
Yeah, I'm just using the wording that I think that they used in the interview, but you're 100% correct. Like it's.
Yeah. So I also do understand that like sometimes it is easier for a quote unquote outsider to see something going on than it is for people who are there all the time, or that are like, because I don't know, like you just notice different things. And but I remember thinking when watching that, just like, man, how shitty must have his mother have felt to like just be like, I overlooked this, and this woman who knew him for 5 minutes figured it out. So I'm not accusing her of anything or saying that she did anything wrong. It just like, imagine how like shitty that would feel.
I am of the opinion that that people who are and make good parents ultimately want to protect their children.
Yeah.
And in any circumstance, not just this one specifically, in any circumstance, to feel like you have failed them, even if you, in Brian's mother's case, even if you felt like you did the right thing, is devastating.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the fact that Brian's mother like was just so hurt over what I would call objectively doing the correct thing and calling out Nickelodeon at the time for being like, I don't like what's going on here. And that directly affected Brian having a job at Nickelodeon,
Mm-hmm.
like, she knows she was right, and it still breaks her fucking heart because of what happened as a result of that.
Right.
You know? So,
Right.
like, that
Because it
just,
hurt him. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, you know, the sad thing about this is that, and this is like the other like major thing that I'll get to before I want to get to like the other stuff that I was going to say, is that like, as a result of this criminal trial, Brian allegedly told various people that he had worked with in the past that he was being tried unfairly, allegedly, and that caused people like Will Friedle and Ryder Strong and Taran Killam and Kimmy Robertson, James Marsden, Alan Thicke, you know, Joanna Kearns, Rich Carell, Tom DeSanto, to write letters in support of Brian. And Drake shows up in the courtroom for sentencing, and there's just a huge amount of people there in support of Brian. Now, who he told correctly versus who he manipulated, ultimately, that's more or less up in the air. I know that like Will and Ryder have gone on their podcast and said like they regret their actions, and
So I have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I figured.
Because I listened to their podcast episode.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good example of why this is really hard to talk about, because in our culture of sound bites and clickbait, things can be taken way out of context. I am not at all suggesting that it wasn't absolutely devastating for Drake Bell to walk into that courtroom and see so many people on Brian's side and have
Mm-hmm.
nobody on his side.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that he didn't tell very many people about this, and his identity was sealed. So how many people did you expect to be on your side?
I think, well,
But
I do want to push back on that just a little bit real quick, because like it's, I don't think it was necessarily that like he felt like he was alone. I think that like it was like he saw so many people that were
yes, and
either
that's what I was
manipulating.
gonna
Okay, yeah,
say.
sorry. Go on then.
Yes, and like I don't know. In some ways, it is kind of a weird thing of like opening it up to that many people in general. Like, shouldn't it just be like the most necessary people there anyway? I mean, I understand wanting some support, so like Drake's mom and brother being there, like that makes sense to me. But does yeah, it just, I don't know. The whole thing is super weird. But yeah, so I listened to the episode of Pod Meets World where they talk about this, and the unfortunate thing, or one unfortunate thing about that, is that they did this episode and put out this episode like more than a month before this documentary came out.
Mm-hmm.
So they never really say what they're talking about, because they say something about how like recently Will and Ryder were asked to give a statement about something.
Okay.
And so I feel like if I had listened to this before I saw the documentary, or even knew that it existed and was coming out, I would have been so confused.
Right.
Whereas listening to it after watching the first 4 episodes, like it made so much sense.
Yeah,
because
at no
point in the episode do they say the name Brian Peck. They don't ever use his name.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they don't use Drake Bell's name, because at that point nobody knew who it was.
Right.
So, but they did this episode where they talk about how Will and Ryder had this friendship with Brian Peck, essentially, because he was on the Boy Meets World set, and Will got him jobs on other sets that Will was in. And Will was like 17 when Boy Meets World started, so he was in this like weird position of being like almost an
An
adult.
adult? Yeah, I was just gonna say exactly that.
But still part of the kids, like
Table, for lack of better
more
words.
with the kids, but not. So he talks a lot in the podcast in general, not just that episode, about like kind of not really being in either set of people, kind of. And so it makes sense to me that like here's an adult who's like trying to befriend you, and at 18, 19, 20, you think you're an adult. You do. You're like, fuck yeah, I'm finally an adult. And then you get to 30 and you're like, I was a fucking child.
Right.
And so a lot of it was like, he's like, yeah, it was inappropriate for me to be friends with him, but I didn't recognize that till much later.
Yeah.
And they both talked about how he would name drop a lot, and that in hindsight, it was like these are all people who vouch for me. If these important A-list stars are my friends, then there can't be anything wrong with me, right? And so they talked about how like nothing sexual ever happened, no abuse ever happened, that the inappropriateness of their relationship was mainly just that like this 40-something-year-old man was befriending these teenagers. And that he'd make inappropriate jokes, he'd say sexist stuff.
Shane Lyons specifically used a bit about blue balls that he talked about in episode 5.
Yeah, and so like that stuff happened, but again, you just kind of like shrug that stuff off, or I can see why you would shrug that stuff off. And talked about like it so clearly felt like this was a guy who groomed everyone around him, essentially, whether it was to abuse them or it was to like help him cover his tracks in a sense. So, and that's very, very common with abusers. They are often very, very nice to other people to cover it up and to then be able to say, well, these people think I'm okay. And they allege that when they wrote these letters of support and went to court to support him, all they had been told was that like this accusation had been made, that he didn't do anything, that he was being falsely accused, and that he really put pressure on them to say like, but I've never like, you know, like you've never seen me do anything like that, you know, I'm a good guy, using all that grooming to be like, that's not your experience with me, so why would it, you know, like. And as young adults, I could easily see how you would be like, yeah, okay. It's the adults, the adults that wrote letters that I like have more of a like, what did
side
you know?
eye at?
Yes. And particularly, like, not to call anybody out, but particularly Joanna Kearns, because like most of these people were men. Almost all of them. And that was something they talk about too, is that like he only hung out with the boys. He didn't really pay any attention to the girls. And that also, he was gay, and that was also used as part of it too, of like, if you said anything or if you pointed out anything that you felt was weird or inappropriate, it would be like, oh, it's because I'm gay. Or, oh, it's because you don't like that he's gay. Like, there was a little more tiptoeing around him because nobody wanted to be accused of, like, being homophobic or whatever.
Right.
So, again, we'll never know what they were told. We'll never know what actually happened.
Yep.
But I can obviously see that. And I will say that the other thing that is really interesting about that episode, and if you are at all curious about it, I would advise listening to it, and I would advise listening to the whole thing, is that they bring on a psychologist or a therapist to talk about this, and the ways in which Ryder and Will talk about their relationship with him, and then how things changed when he went to prison. And that, like, Ryder talks about, like, seeing him, like, several years ago post prison at, like, a party, and was just like, now as like a 30 something year old adult, he was still doing the same shit. But now that I'm in my 30s, I could, like, see it and see the way that he was, like, schmoozing and dropping names and trying to get you on his side. And it was like, I then understood, like, how gross it was in a way that I couldn't understand at 15. So, and the way that they talk about, like, just the sorting through all the feelings about, like, this was somebody we liked and trusted, but now in hindsight that we know what he did, that we understand what grooming is, that we understand what manipulation is, like, all these things that, like, it's just a lot to unpack and figure out. And the therapist kind of walks them through some stuff and says, like, just because you weren't physically abused, sexually abused, doesn't mean this wasn't trauma to you in a way.
Right.
And we're not going to get into, like, levels of trauma or, like, comparing trauma. Of course, what Drake Bell went through was horrific, and nothing changes that. But when you learn that you were manipulated and treated poorly to support that, whether intentionally or not, that is also traumatic. And so this therapist was explaining that, like, it makes sense that you have, like, so many different feelings about this, and that you are having so much trouble talking about this and understanding this and processing this. And that is, like, the thing about predators, the thing about manipulators, the thing about abusers is that they don't just traumatize their victim or victims or whatever you want to say, I know victim isn't a word we like that much anymore, but I don't know what to use in this moment. That it's traumatic for everyone involved because of the ways in which you were involved unknowingly, possibly. I do believe them, but I understand if you don't. I think it's a complex issue of not knowing a lot of stuff, and we'll never know all the details of stuff. So, yeah.
I agree. And I mean, I'm not going to try and expound too much on what you had to say there, because I mean, you said it.
Can
Go
I
on.
say, I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
have one more
go
thing.
on.
So in the 5th episode, this is brought up when Soledad O'Brien is interviewing Drake Bell and says something about, like, kind of how do you feel about some of these people, and they use Will and Ryder specifically. And the question she asks is, like, knowing that they were manipulated and didn't know what they were supporting, does that change anything about how you felt about that day of walking into the courtroom? And he says no. And I'm like, of course it doesn't.
Right.
Like, of course it doesn't, because
the only way that changes is if you go back in time and you make it so that they weren't sitting there, you know? Like,
right. And that, you know, she sort of asks about them, and he kind of says like, you know, I worked with Will on Spider-Man, like I've interacted with these people, I've interacted with not just those two, but like other people, and like no one has reached out to me to apologize. And 100% that would suck. 100% that feels, if I were Drake, I would feel very slighted, and that's not a strong enough word, but I would like, that would feel awful. Being on the other side, and he sort of says this too, is that he's sort of like, but I also understand that like in a work setting and like in this, and this topic is so hard to bring up in any circumstance. So he sort of gave a little caveat of like, but I kind of get it. And that, yeah, that's what I would say too, is like, I can so imagine being somebody who wrote one of these letters and then interacting with this child who's not a child anymore, and being like, I feel terrible about this, but I don't want to bring up the trauma again.
Yeah, how do you step aside and go, hey, great job on that line there, Drake. By the way, I'm gonna open up this trauma for you again.
Yeah.
Like,
so
I saw both sides of that.
So
too,
I was like, that does really suck to have interacted with these people and gotten no mention of it or apologies for supporting him. But I also get that, like, yeah, again, it's a weird situation. It's like, how do I bring up this trauma again? It's also like, I'm super embarrassed that I did this, so I want to forget it, even though that's not the way you deal with trauma. That's the way we all want to deal with trauma, is to forget it, but that's not how it works. So I completely get it, and it's just awful all around. I will say that since the 5th episode came out, an article came out, I think in People, I don't know, where it talks about Drake and Ryder Strong had a conversation, and that like essentially the article's like, we had a conversation and we're cool.
Yeah, because I was gonna say there was I believe that the producers for Quiet on Set did reach out to Strong and Friedel and did not get a response. So
yeah, so I don't know what all the rules are, but I think if you are mentioning like anybody in a documentary like that, you do technically have to reach out to them somehow, their people, whatever, to get a statement.
Yeah,
the fact
and I totally understand that.
The fact that they didn't give a statement, I don't think anybody did.
I wasn't going to say like, and I think that this was when I follow up when you said that like what Drake said is I don't think he presented it as like a slight, more as less than like a statement of fact, which I think is like, I don't hold anything against Ryder or Will for not saying anything. It's just like saying like they did reach out and they declined to say, like they didn't get a response. So like,
and I think
just want to make sure that that's
like,
clear.
Not what. You say something and that gets picked apart. You don't say anything, that gets picked apart. What you say, like, it just, there's no winning in these situations.
The stuff that didn't get covered in this documentary is just as important as the stuff that did.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know, like that to kind of just sew our sides together on that is like, I think we're both kind of saying like, you know, there's like ultimately, and this is what sucks about this, is that like, they don't have the time, the money, the resources to just cover like every single thing that got hit in this.
Yeah. Well, and from what I understand, they could do 5 more episodes about not only expanding on the stuff that was talked about, but just bringing up other things, that other abuse and other harassment and whatever.
So Yeah. So yeah, totally agree with you on that. And so to kind of go back to the bookmark that I said way towards the beginning is that like, and these are criticisms, but like this is not like in a negative, like I'm not like coming at Quiet on Set. Like these are just things that I noticed that like, you know, you can't please everybody. You can't do everything at the same time. But like
Well,
like
I
I said
think if you
earlier,
don't have any criticisms about something,
then
then you're not
yeah.
thinking, you're not you're not thoughtfully engaging with it.
And that's a lot that like this is why I'm getting off topic of what I was going to say, but I want to say this. I think that that's something that like is a big problem nowadays is that some people go into consuming something in bad faith. Like they are going like I'll say this like to kind of give a clear cut analogy that is totally off topic so that people can't get mad about me trying to like equate Nickelodeon to something. But like the two big wrestling companies in the world right now, or as far as America is concerned, are WWE and AEW. And there's always going to be fans that watch WWE to be like, see, this is why AEW is better. And there's going to be WWE fans that watch AEW and go, see, this is why WWE is better, is because they don't do this or they don't do that. Like, there's always going to be critics that are like, well, I'm only a WWE fan, so anything anyone else does is trash and they're the worst and this is why they're awful and should die. And like, so there's always people that are going to go, and vice versa, of course. But like, there's always going to be people that go into something in poor faith, whether it be because they want the attention or they just don't want to critically read, or it just like, or like, what's the something bias? I can't think of the words. It's something like like I'll just say like just because of a bias. Like they're like, well,
lots of them, but yeah,
sure.
I know what you're talking about. The like
okay,
where you only take
you consume something to a confirmation bias. That's what it is.
Yes, there we go.
Yes, confirmation bias, to be like, aha, see, this thing is horrible, and it's like, where did you get that? Like,
yeah, you only take in the information that supports your theory.
Yes, and nothing else.
Yes.
So like that has nothing to do with what I was originally going to say, but I just wanted to point that out because I don't want people to like say that I think that I'm like trying to bridge a gap between confirmation bias and these criticisms. But like I know that Mark Summers was on a podcast, and I said this like back at the beginning, where he said that he essentially just got kind of like bum rushed. Like he was like, they kind of came up to me and said, we're going to do a thing about this. And once he realized that like what they were actually talking about, he was like, I'm out of here. Like this does like
they
this
show him in the first episode very briefly, clearly
and
interviewed, and that like he alleges that to get this interview, what they told him about the documentary is not what it was actually about, and that once he was there for the interview and they brought up like a clip of some bad shit and asked him to like remark on it, and he found out what this documentary was actually about, he like left because he felt lied to and misled. And I don't know what happened, and I'm not going to speak on what happened, but
just from my little bit of research, he alleges that he'd never met Dan Schneider and he had heard nothing about what happened with Dan Schneider, so he felt like he didn't really have
and
like
that
he said they never worked together. Go on.
And that afterwards they reached out to him and told him that they were going to include a small piece of the small interview they did with him to sort of give context about the positive aspects of Nickelodeon. And that he's saying that he thinks it's unethical for them to include that clip without his knowledge, but I'm guessing he signed something before giving that interview that said they could use the footage, because that's generally how it works.
Yeah.
So even though in the middle of the interview he decided to leave and not finish, there's still an agreement. So that I don't know. And he's not necessarily wrong. Maybe it is unethical, even if it is legal.
And that's the thing too, is like, it's like, you know, like we can't, and there's some people on TikTok, I'm not going to name any names or anything, I'm not trying to start no drama, but like there's some people on TikTok that like use that confirmation bias to say like things like, oh, see, like this, like the people on Quiet on Set are no angels. And it's like, they don't have to be like inherently good in all aspects in order to shed light on something that was actively awful going on at Nickelodeon. Now, what should they be better and do better? Absolutely. But like, you know, it doesn't invalidate what they are bringing to light because they pissed off Mark Summers, you know, like, or, but this other thing is I feel less sure on how to feel about it. So, the episode five included, a very short clip from, a cast member from the Amanda Show named Raquel. And they did not invite Raquel to be a part of like that mini panel that they did towards the end, where it was like Giovanni and Brian and Shane, and then Soledad.
Do we know they didn't invite her?
According to TikTok, a TikTok that she did, she said she was not asked to be a part of it. She basically, so I did a little bit of research on this. She basically did a TikTok and was like, I'm done. They wanted my trauma, but they didn't want me to speak on it. I wasn't asked to be a part of this. She was hot mad, and I'm not saying she's wrong for being hot mad.
No, I just wanted to make sure that you had that information, because just from watching episode 5, I was like, I didn't know either way. She wasn't there.
Yeah,
but
correct.
I didn't know why. But if that's what she's alleging on TikTok, then yes.
Yeah, so she basically did a TikTok basically saying, I'm done with the entertainment industry. They get what they want from you, and then they're done with you, which like I understand, and it's a stressful thing to be in any sort of entertainment industry, because it's 1,000% a what have you done for me lately kind of business. Like, it sucks. Like, it doesn't, like, I have what I would consider to be a pretty decent resume, but like ultimately, you know, is that going to mean anything the next time I go into a job? It may mean something, but not much, you know. But this isn't about me. My point being is that like she went on TikTok and basically was like, she was not told what type of documentary she was going to be part of. No consideration on whether the information that they were delving up would be quote unquote triggering for her. She did appear in 2 of the first 4 episodes, and she wasn't in there, but like, her thing that she talked about was like Amanda spitting in her face during a segment, which like the idea, I guess, is that she was supposed to just spit. Like when Raquel says spit it out, Amanda was just supposed to spit in general. And she kept actively choosing to spit in Raquel's face. And Raquel got upset about it. And then either a director or a producer or someone pulled her aside and was like, you have to take it. She's the star. You know, and Brian's mom said, like, that's quote unquote racism. Like, we as a culture of like people of color are conditioned to basically be told that like, you don't speak up about that kind of stuff. You just take it and you deal with it. And she said something very poignant where she was like, they are not ever taught that same thing. You know, like, that is not a level of the culture in which like white folks really are a part of. Like, they aren't taught to, like, especially towards people of color. Like, so I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on that. Those are just things that I noted. My main criticism of episode 5 is that like, to do what they did, it wasn't a bait and switch, but what I would have done is I would have had an episode completely like dedicated. I would have done an episode. I would say, we're going to do an episode 6. We're going to talk to Giovanni. We're going to talk to Raquel. We're going to talk to, you know, all these people, because it felt like they were just like, we only have time for 4 or 5 questions, and that's all we're going to do. And then we're going to be done with it. Like, it just felt like there's, and again, I understand, like, they don't have necessarily the resources or the time or the desire to keep this moving. Maybe it's too triggering for them. Maybe it's too triggering for the actors. Who knows? But like, it just felt so short to talk on something that was so heavy, you know?
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, I'm fairly sure that a lot of the people in this got copies to see before it aired. But at the same time, it's clear that this was filmed after it aired. Because of the way that there was a little bit about like, what has the reaction been since this is out. Which means this was filmed in the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a lot of time to throw something together.
Right.
And I think like it would have behooved them to like say that, and to say that like this is not meant to be some sort of end all be all wrap up of post this documentary coming out. This is just meant to be that we are checking in with a few people that we've been able to talk to in this amount of time or whatever, you know, like, and I don't think at any point they made it seem like it was supposed to be some sort of like closure or whatever, but I think it would have been smart to sort of acknowledge that like this was just another piece
Mm-hmm.
to add to, and that they wanted to check in with some of these people post that, because I mean, and again, he does not owe anyone this, and I could see it being super traumatizing, but it would have been really interesting to get like a whole episode just from Drake Bell about like, what has this been like now that it's public?
And yeah, and
And
as a side
again,
note, I do want to acknowledge that Drake makes no excuses for his own behavior, because he's also got some shit going on, and like I appreciate that it is not for him, at least as it appears to me as a person, it does not appear as like this is why I am broken and you should blame. I'm passing off things that I've done as an excuse because of this thing, and he was quote unquote a man and was like, listen, I'm responsible for the behaviors that I have exhibited in other situations, but this is something that did happen to me, so I'm going to talk about it. It didn't feel like that's to me that like it's so interesting that like that Drake credits Dan as being one of the few people to reach out to him and be there for him, because like the quote unquote person that Drake is in saying that, and how Dan handled it with his fucking Dan Warp interview, when he could have had like, he could have gone on the documentary if he felt some type of way about it. But like, I think he was so like, well, they're gonna paint me in a bad light, and it's like, you know what, dude? What paints you in a worse light is the fact that you got fucking Boogie to co-sign your bullshit on your own YouTube channel. You know, like, feel how I want to feel about Boogie, or feel how you want to feel about Boogie, anybody, but like, Boogie had no business conducting an interview for Dan on his own YouTube channel.
No.
Full stop. Like,
yeah, I will say that yes, there is, Drake pleaded guilty to some charges of, I don't even remember what the charges are, but essentially a woman has accused him of grooming her and talking to her inappropriately when she was a teenager.
minor. Yeah.
A minor, yes. He alleges that not all of her accusations are true, but that but that he did talk to her, and that it was inappropriate.
It was, but it wasn't but this wasn't a vehicle for him to basically be like, see, like I didn't, you know, it wasn't a vehicle for that. You know what I mean? Like, and I appreciated that it wasn't like I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying like, this is what I appreciated. Is that it wasn't like that for him. So
no, I think like, I'm glad it was mentioned. I'm glad it wasn't used as like, or I'm glad that his trauma and abuse wasn't used as a like, but I was abused, so
like a hurt people cycle continues.
So I should be pardoned for that.
Exactly.
But I think that something that's missing in documentaries like this, in content like this, is that conversation about how hurt people, about how abused people become, some abused people become abusers, or become eternal victims, or become, you know, like, generally speaking, like, it would have been interesting to have a conversation about how, like, this behavior probably stems somewhat from his abuse, and that his alcoholism and his other problems, quote unquote, mental health problems and stuff in his 20s stemmed a lot from the abuse that he suffered. And that, like, and he mentions not going to therapy for it, and it just would have been, to me, a really interesting conversation and a missing conversation in a lot of these types of things about how, like, essentially abused people become abusers unless they break the cycle.
Right.
And you have to deliberately and intentionally break the cycle through therapy, something. And so I just felt like they could have done a better job about talking about that, because, and I think it's an easy thing to do in things like this. I think it's an easy thing to do in talking about trauma, true crime, that kind of stuff, to paint people as either bad or good and not somewhere in the middle. So, like you were saying about Dan Schneider, like, a lot of what was talked about in this documentary is about how he did bad things. And I'm not taking away from that at all. But then they also mention this one thing about him, or Drake brings up, that Dan reached out to him. Because people are complex. Like,
There's
nobody
lots
is
of shades of gray in
100%
this.
one way or the other. And so it would have been, so I think it's very easy in things like this, whether they say it deliberately and intentionally, that they're painting it as Dan Schneider bad, Brian Peck bad, which they are bad, Drake Bell good, other people good, like, other victims good, that it would have been better. Maybe not better. It would have been interesting to point out some of these shades of gray and to say, again, like, this is not only bad because it happened, but it's going to keep happening until we change things, whether that's changing laws, changing rules, changing situations, or changing yourself through therapy or other ways of healing from trauma.
Yeah, 100%. The last kind of bit that I kind of wanted to talk about, and this isn't a part of the documentary in and of itself, but I independently watched a video that was very fascinating to me that leads into conversations that I think should have been happening as a result of this. And it's focused specifically on, and when you mentioned like Ariana Grande being like the biggest star essentially to come out of Nickelodeon, I was like, holy shit. Like, I watched this video just on a whim, not thinking about Quiet on Set, like almost a month and a half ago. And it was just like, boom, like it just like fit together so well, because the YouTuber's name is CJ the X, and they did it almost an hour and a half long video called The Neurosis of Cat Valentine. And it talks about, because Cat Valentine is the character that Ariana played on Victorious and then also on Sam and Cat, and how, like, initially, like, the character of Cat Valentine was like kind of more of a complete like teenager. And then all of a sudden the writers kind of just took this hard left, and like all of a sudden she was kind of like this very dim-witted, like, for lack of better words, and it's gross to say this out loud, but like this is the best way I can describe it, like a sexy baby. Like, she was just like helpless kind of, and like very dumb but so cute that you just wanted to take care of her. And
we could do a whole episode about characters that get turned into stupid.
like I personally don't necessarily think that the term bimbo is always negative, but like that could be a better way to put it. Like they just make her like this teenage bimbo that like it's like, oh my god, it's so hot that like she thinks that she can squeeze this potato and get juice out of it, so she's like sexually like grunting while she's holding this potato, or she's upside down pouring water on herself going, I'm thirsty, or like, you know, like getting into like a essentially what can be amounts to like an analog for like a bukkake session, because she's like in a bikini with a squirt, like a super soaker, and a bunch of dudes are standing in line squirting her specifically like in her face and on her chest. And it's like, what are we doing? This is a children's show. Like, what the fuck, bro? Like,
yeah. And it's so funny because like a lot of children's programming, a lot of children's movies and stuff like that have jokes in them that go over most kids' heads and that the adults find funny.
right.
However, there are a lot of ways to do that without it being disgustingly sexual.
Correct. And then I will also point out that 3 weeks ago, so by this point, Dan's video had already gone out. Alexa Nicholas, who was on, I believe, Zoe 101 and was a part of the documentary, she watches and reacts to Dan's interview with a Sickelodian blimp in the back. Instead of Nickelodeon, it says Sickelodian.
That is something that I have said for decades, probably at this point, as like just a way to react to something.
Yeah, someone said
my college friends do.
So
too.
the top comment, or the one of the very top comments is, Dan should be interviewed by an actual reporter who is willing to grill and expose this gross predator. Jail. Like, and someone else says his entire apology was basically, I'm sorry you felt that way.
Yep. 100% it was. 100% it was. And so many times he would like, would I do things differently now? Yes.
Because it's a different time, and also you're no longer in power, you fucking fool. Like,
right.
You know, like it's not that difficult to see. Like and the fact that he really focuses heavy on this. Well, I was under a lot of pressure and I was inexperienced. Like, nah. You can't fall on this like yet another excuse. And as a side note, I want to say, like, we didn't touch on this, but I think the fact that like, and what's so heartbreaking to me specifically about this is that like people like Jason Handy and Brian Peck went to jail for less than a decade. And in the case of Brian, he just went to fucking Disney and he was on set for the Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. And in some cases he was behind the camera, in front of the camera rather. Yeah. And it's like, it didn't fucking matter to them. They were like, well, we need a good fucking dialogue or dialect coach. So doesn't matter that he was literally, you know, he's 40 something years old and he was convicted of like basically essaying Drake Bell. We want him. Like, basically what you're saying is we don't care. That's what you're saying.
100%.
We don't care that he did a thing. So, Alexa Nicholas apparently does she does a thing called Eat Predators Daily. Like that's her podcast, I guess. And so that was the impetus for her. So it wasn't like she was just watching it specifically to like, you know, farm content or anything. That's like a thing that she does. She's also got a video that she put out 2 weeks ago calling she exposes Brian Peck's enablers. So, you know, Gabriel Iglesias. I forgot. I continually forget that Gabriel Iglesias was on Nickelodeon. He told a joke once about how his first big check, he bought a Volkswagen from or either that or Nickelodeon like gifted him a Volkswagen. So he would like hit his chest and then point at the car and go Nickelodeon, like it's just like where the car is from.
That's funny.
And Gabriel Iglesias has got his own stuff going on. I don't want to fully protect him because like he did a joke once live where he was talking about how he was kind of like like pseudo embarrassed that his stepson called him out for constantly using jokes about him. And I was like, nah, man, if your stepson says knock that shit off, like you don't like, why is that a part of your set? Like just stop telling the jokes about your stepson.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do, man.
Yeah,
like that's the
weird.
end of it, you know? But like, that's not about him. It's not about them. But I think that, Alexa is definitely diving in. She's even got a video coming out very soon that looks like it has Raquel in it. That's scheduled for the 15th of April. So by the time you're hearing this, it'll already be out. Can't obviously tell you anything about the information, but there's a lot of there's a lot of content that Alexa is putting out that we have not watched as a result of the stuff on Quiet on Set. So I'm personally going to end this by saying, just be careful who you're listening to on TikTok. Some of these people do not care. They just see that it's a trend to talk about it. And so they'll just say shit. Vet your information. Amelia and I are mostly giving our opinions here. We're trying to be as factual as possible. You've heard Amelia fact check me a couple of times on shit that I've said, and I appreciate that. And I'm open to that. Just be careful. But like, also shit has got to change. And as long as someone like Brian Peck, who was convicted of a crime involving a minor, can literally walk out of the jail and walk into a job at Disney, like shit, shit's wild. Shit is wild. So if you have anything else that you want to say about it, by all means, feel free. But like, to me, I was just like, there were too many predatory factors in adults, and I include the stuff that Dan allegedly did, even if he was like, well, I never touched a kid himself, but it's like, you fostered
you maybe
an environment.
Didn't sexually abuse a child,
but he definitely abused children.
But he definitely harassed and abused children and people, allegedly. And one of the things he said in his apology video or whatever is about how, like, because he got asked about, like, how does it happen that two writers are sharing a salary? And he says something about how, like, that's not an uncommon thing when writers are starting out. And I don't have any knowledge of whether that's true or not. I have enough knowledge to know that, yes, the way that new screenwriters are treated and hired is not the best. So it would not surprise me if that is a common practice. How it's legal, again, from an HR standpoint, I don't know how that's legal. So there's that. But anyway, yeah, I'm just so tired of this trend of apology videos or apology notes screenshot and posted on Instagram or whatever, because 9 times out of 10, nothing changes afterwards.
Yes.
I understand that to change behavior takes time, in the sense of, like, I don't mean in the sense of, like, it takes time to change your own behavior. I mean in the sense of, like, if what we are asking for of people in apologizing is to change their behavior and not just say, I'm sorry, we have to give them time to do that, to show that, right? Like, you can't change behavior in a day. I can't change, like, I can't change that I'm late for work every day until I go to work again. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could apologize for being late to work every day last week, but I can't demonstrate that I'm changing my behavior until the next time I go to work, right? So that does take time, but we have given people who have apologized for stuff lots of time to change, and they often don't.
Because they in my opinion, they ride out the storm, something else comes up, the focus moves away from them. They don't have to change their behavior.
Yep. Exactly. So that's where it's like, I understand why apologizing publicly is necessary, needed in a lot of cases, but because so little comes out of it after that, that just about every apology video that comes out is now just fodder for us to look at and roll our eyes. Because it's like, we know nothing's going to come of this.
Yeah.
I will eat my words if something does, but usually doesn't. So I don't believe anything this person's saying.
Yeah. I would very much, and learning this, I would very much say that if you do want to look more into this, again, I'm going to point at Alexa Nichols, because it's youtube.com/eatpredators, because she's got content from Keenan, Angelique Bates, like Raven Simone and her wife are talking to people. Like, you can find all of this information. She goes into her own reaction over Dan Schneider's interview with Boogie. Like, there's just a lot on there. So, not all of it's going to be correct and good. Like, there's criticisms of Josh Peck on there, which like Drake said, like, hey, Josh and I are good. We have talked. We have a good relationship. Now, what that is as far as I'm concerned, is what Drake says. Like, if Drake is cool, and it's not like it even matters what I think, but like, I have no reason to then go looking up reasons to say, oh, this is what Drake actually meant. Like, if that's what the fuck he wanted to say, that's what he wanted to say. Right. So like, I'll kind of end. I guess I'll, I don't want to say I'll end this, but I'll actually end my thoughts with like an interesting quote from self-professed nice guy, but everyone else kind of thinks he's an asshole. CM Punk is like, he's like, he did an interview not that long ago with Ariel Helwani, and they asked him about the event that got him fired from All Elite Wrestling. And he's like, this is why I stay off the internet, more or less, is because people are going to believe what they want to believe. And I say, you know what? Go ahead and believe it, and then leave me the hell alone. Like, so if for whatever reason you don't want to believe what Drake Bell has come forth and said, fine, but then leave him alone. Like,
you can believe or not believe anything that people say, regardless of the evidence. That's your right, but it's not your right to come after them,
and harass them,
to send death threats. That's never okay. Yeah. So the internet is a wild place, y'all. But it's the Wild West. But I will say that as much as we as a society like to say that the internet is awful or that technology is awful, it's not the tool. It's the people using the tool.
Correct.
So there's a lot of awesome stuff on the internet. There's a lot of really wonderful people on the internet. There are a lot of life-saving ways that we use technology. 100%. So none of that stuff has morals or ethics or feelings or thoughts. They are tools for us to use, and how we use them is on us.
Mm-hmm. And I personally would hope that in the near future going forward, we would stop incentivizing and monetizing the negatives that come out of the internet and start doing that with the positives. Because
I will say,
in a goofy way, I feel like the flying cars that we fucking thought we were supposed to have by now would have happened by now if we focused more on the positive shit and let the negative shit die in the dark dredges of the internet, in the corners, quietly and alone.
Yeah.
Like it should be.
And it's Not just the internet, it's capitalism.
Also that too, but like,
and capitalism incentivizes whatever sells, regardless of morality. Anyway, we've talked about this long enough. So
you can find Amelia at Shake Meets World and at Fuck the Perfect Life on the Instagram. And you can find me at Ablacksparrow. Most places, including Twitch. You can also find me at Feywild and Out on Twitch. I weirdly hit this spot on TikTok now where I can do TikTok lives.
Oh.
Apparently you can't do them until you hit like 800 followers or so. I think I've dipped back down underneath it, but like I've sat in stunned awe at that fact that I have like 800 followers anywhere.
Yeah, I was like,
really.
Oh, damn.
But also like, I don't know what the fuck to do with TikTok live about. And to your point, like getting away from the conversation about the Nickelodeon stuff, but like I see so much weirdness on TikTok lives where someone will just like come in and just say out of pocket shit that I'm like, they're doing that to white folks. What are they going to do to me? Like, it's probably going to be worse. So maybe I'll do a TikTok live sometime. I just have to figure out what the fuck I would want to talk about and how to keep creeps out.
I'm pretty sure you have to have 1,000 followers.
You have to have 1,000 followers to do to use the TikTok live on your desktop / do gaming content, but you can do it from your phone at 800. I got a notification
okay. Gotcha.
and it's like unlocked in my app now, so I can go live.
Gotcha.
It's just a thing. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you found this interesting. And I hope you go do something less serious because you can't live in the serious all the time.
Yeah. And sorry we didn't want to. It just didn't feel appropriate to end this with like a goofy internet video that I found out of nowhere. But
yeah,
those will be back.
Was what the fuck is this?
Yeah, you said
fuck?
That offline. You're like the whole thing is like, what the fuck?
And like you said at the beginning, like, what the fuck is wrong with y'all?
Yeah, what the fuck are y'all doing?
Yeah, what the fuck are you all doing? Like, okay. Anyway, so yeah.
We appreciate you listening to us.
Yeah. Yep.
Tune in next time. I don't have a funny thing to say to this, but the funniness and the goofiness, I promise, will return. Also, we'll probably, because Amelia and I are going to C2E2 together again. So, we'll probably talk about that coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
So tune in for that. But I'm Sherrick, and that's Amelia, and this isn't normally the way that we end this, but we'll call you again in a couple of weeks. Okay, bye.